Hi everyone, welcome back to the Murder Tapes podcast, season 2, episode 1. I'm so excited for this new season and to share some more cases with you all. We have some really good ones coming up. Thank you so much for supporting this little college student in her dreams. By the way, I've been on TikTok for the last couple of days promoting the show, and we've gotten so many new listeners. I was not expecting that at all. We've gotten new followers on Instagram, and I'm just really excited for it. I'm also going to be posting about a giveaway very soon, so make sure you tune into our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast. And if you like the show, please leave me a review because it does help out a lot and it gets our show recommended to more people. That's all for my update. Let's get into today's case. Today we're going to be talking about the Maury Travis case, also known as the St. Louis video strangler. I do want to add a disclaimer that this case is very hard to listen to, and some audio may be too disturbing for some listeners. Viewer discretion is advised. In the summer of 2014, Katrina McGaw was relaxing in her home and watching TV. She decided that she wanted to watch a true crime documentary, and when she began watching it, she would never have expected to see what she did. The very home that she was renting was shown, and it was said to be the house of the serial killer Maury Travis. She continued watching as the crime scene detectives showed photographs of blood-stained walls and carpets in her home that she recognized. The scariest part of all is that her basement was where he filmed all of his killings. He would tie women up and film their torture before strangling them to death. She had been in the basement with one of her younger siblings plenty of times before and was horrified when she was informed about the situation, rightfully so. Another disgusting thing about this experience is that the furniture that belonged to Maury was left there for her free of charge. She had been unknowingly using all of it this whole time. Of course, she had the same reaction we all would and contacted the landlord in order to terminate her lease immediately. But this is when things get even weirder. She found out that her landlord was Maury's mother, and when she spoke with her about the situation, she said that she wouldn't allow her to break her lease. Katrina was upset because she hadn't been notified that over 20 women were murdered there. However, when they made it to court, Maury's mom said that she did tell her what happened. This isn't a surprise to anyone that she lied in order to profit off the home, but unfortunately, there isn't much that can be done about it. Luckily, in this situation, Katrina was able to break her lease through the St. Louis Housing Authority, but this isn't something that always happens. Depending on the state you live in, it isn't a requirement that the real estate agent or home buyer disclose this information. In Texas, for example, this information doesn't need to be disclosed, but in California, it does if it occurred within the last 3 years. However, if you ask, they do have to tell you, so if you're house hunting, be aware and always ask. Earlier I mentioned that one of her younger siblings would play in the basement he committed the murders in. Well, according to ABC 10, Katrina would later tell police that on one occasion, the little girl claimed to have seen a woman scared and crying near the pole he would tie his victims up at, but no one was ever there. I couldn't imagine realizing I'm living in such an evil place. I literally would never be able to sleep again. Maury Travis was born on October 25, 1965 in St. Louis, Missouri, to Sandra and Michael V. Travis. When he was just a teenager, he enjoyed killing insects, which may seem like not that big of a deal, because lots of kids do it simply because they're scared of them. However, he had darker intentions. He ended up killing one of his neighbor's dogs. He also began to fantasize about torturing and murdering women at a very young age. I've mentioned this in other episodes, but it's important to note that people that enjoy abusing or killing animals at a young age end up inflicting this harm onto humans. While in high school, he lived in Ferguson, Missouri with his parents, and his neighbors would recall him being respectful and quiet. According to one neighbor, he would mow her lawn without asking and even showed her how to use an electric hedge trimmer. It's important to note that serial killers often appear friendly in order to gain trust from people around them and their victims. This is known as superficial charm, and you will see it in a lot of cases that we cover. Other students that went to high school with him would recall him never being in the yearbook. One of his teachers would also remember that he was very quiet, especially for being a teenager. Once he graduated, he joined the Army and was a dental and medical assistant for about 2 years. He then went to Morris Brown College in Atlanta, and during his time there, he developed a $300 a day cocaine and crack addiction. This was during the crack epidemic when its effects weren't completely known. Crack causes a more intense high than cocaine due to the way it's ingested. Something to keep in mind is that crack was more popular in lower income areas due to the cheaper pricing. Both of these drugs cause severe brain damage even with just a few uses. It directly affects your mood and mental state because it interferes with dopamine that is being reabsorbed by neurons. Depression is one of the most common symptoms. Auditory hallucinations, restlessness, paranoia, and psychosis are some other symptoms. Cocaine in particular increases your stress hormones, which can lead to panic disorders and problems with aggression and violence, which is exactly what we see in this case. In 1988, he went on to rob a total of 5 shoe stores over the course of 8 days. The detectives would say he seemed way too nice to commit this type of crime when interviewing him. One of them would say he didn't seem like a criminal. He was reserved, quiet, and cooperative. Maury would say that he used a plastic gun when robbing the stores and was under the effects of crack. He made it known that he never planned on robbing these stores, it just happened. He would also state that he had begun going to a rehabilitation center after and was done using drugs. The judge would agree that these robberies made Maury do something out of his character. Former United States Representative William Lacey Clay wrote on congressional stationery asking the court for leniency. He wrote, quote, "I have known Mr. Travis and his family for a number of years, and I feel he is deserving of special consideration in this matter. Since January of 1988, Mr. Travis has conducted himself in such a manner as to pose no threat to society. I am pleading that he be given leniency and probation with the condition of voluntary service at a charitable community agency." Nonetheless, he was still sentenced to 15 years at the Farmington Correctional Center, which is way less than what he should have been sentenced to due to the severity of the crime. Before we move on, I want to mention that William would later state he didn't remember sending this letter on behalf of Maury and his family because he wrote lots of similar letters for other people. While Maury was in prison, he would write letters to the judge about how horrible his time was there. In one letter, he would say, quote, "Daily and hourly, also at any given moment, I think of taking my life. The conditions here are excruciatingly tormenting, to say the least. Staying in my cell and crying myself to sleep most every night will not help, but it's so very hard to believe this happened to me." He would also bring up the assaults and rapes he was a witness to. He never mentions if he was ever a victim of rape or assault, but it's important to note that people in prison may assume this behavior is normal and begin to become aroused with the idea of rape or assault. That does not mean all people incarcerated feel this way, but for this particular case, we do see this. Maury also already had previous mental issues along with heavy drug use, which can only make things worse. As for the part of the letter that mentions how much he hated prison, it's worth noting that this isn't uncommon for serial killers to complain about. When they are placed somewhere they don't have control over, it can be frustrating for them. He was unfortunately released on parole after serving only 5 years and 3 months at the age of 28. During this time, he rented out a duplex, and one of the women that lived next door would have a couple of run-ins with him, but he was never rude. In fact, one time, while she was doing laundry, he scared her by accident and apologized. After this encounter, he would hum every time he would enter the room in order to make sure that she knew it was him. Unfortunately, during this time, he was still using crack. In February of 1998, he was arrested again for drug possession, which violated his parole, and he was sent back to prison. He was then paroled again in January of 1999. When he was released, he moved into the home he committed the crimes in. The address is 1001 Ford Drive in Ferguson, Missouri. In order to pay for it, he would work different waitstaff jobs. He was then arrested when he was 35 for violating his parole once again, and only served 4 months before being released. You would assume that continuously violating parole would get him in more trouble, but he was given the chance to commit more crimes. Before we get into each individual murder, I want to mention that Maury targeted sex workers. This is a common target for serial killers because they assume their families won't go looking for them because of their lifestyle. They also may use drugs, which would lead family members to believe they may just be strung out somewhere, and when they recover, they'll come back. Other sex workers may not want to get involved with the police either because their work is illegal, so 9 times out of 10, these cases go cold. It's very unfortunate, but important to note when analyzing the killer's psyche. Maury Travis would continue to do crack and hire sex workers to come to his house to do drugs and engage in sexual activity. He began filming each interaction, and after he would send them on their way. However, some of these women weren't given the same chance. On one tape, he could be seen wrapping a belt around a tied-up woman's neck and choking her until she died. He then filmed her body and said, "This is first kill number 1. First kill was 19 years old. Name, I don't know. First kill was nice. This woman was never found or identified by police. The tape was labeled Wedding Day, and the tape included an hour and 26 minutes of a wedding ceremony, and then it played the rape, torture, and murder. I'm going to play the audio of one of the tapes before we begin. It will also be available on our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast.
Jumping in the car with a you don't know? You saw her? Yeah. You want to say something to your kids? Mom, sorry. You saw her being a dolphin? Yeah. You saw her not raising. Who raising your kids? Me and my mom and dad. You ain't raising shit.
While police watched these tapes, they noticed that Maury would often ask the women to dance in white clothing and wear blackout sunglasses so that they couldn't see. They, of course, weren't aware of what he was planning. He then tied rope or handcuffs around them and taped their eyes with duct tape. He would then drag them to his basement and keep them as prisoners. As I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, there was a pole in the basement. This exact pole is where he would shackle each woman and shock them with stun guns before sexually assaulting them. He would also assault them verbally by talking down on their character because they were sex workers. They had to call him master. He wanted to degrade them and break them down before murdering them. In another video, Maury would say, "I can't hear you. What are you saying? Say it clear." To which the woman responded, "You are the master. It pleases me to serve you." She began to cry, and he would force her to keep repeating the sentence over and over again. Oddly, while doing this, he would often change the tone of his voice. In the same video I just mentioned, he would say, "You sorry?" in a low voice. And when the woman would say yes, he would say, "About what?" The woman would say everything, and he would degrade her even more for getting in his car and agreeing to go home with him to engage in sexual activity for money. After, he would ask her if she wanted to say anything to her kids. She would say she wanted to say sorry to them. This is truly scary because this implies that she will never see them again. He then asked who would continue raising them, and the woman said she would, but he would reply saying she wouldn't be raising them. He then said, quote, "You over here on your back smoking crack? You ain't going home tomorrow. I'm gonna keep you about a week." This is interesting because while he is degrading women for smoking crack, he does the same thing. So this shows us that he has some narcissistic traits because he is not able to see his own wrongful actions, only others. It's important to note that this could also be Maury taking out his anger on women that do drugs because he's angry at the fact that he himself does drugs. After all, he specifically targets women that have drug addictions. Another important person in this case is Reverend Inuka Mwanguzi. She worked with her local church in order to help women struggling with drug addiction. She would allow them in her home and help in any way she could. She told ABC News, quote, "Their families do everything they can, but after a while they don't know what to do, and so they give up on them, and they pull away from them." One of the girls she helped was one of Maury's victims. Her name was Alyssa Greenwade. She knew that Alyssa had just gotten out of jail and began to do drugs again. She was a mother of 2, and Inuka didn't want her in danger, so she let her stay at her home. However, Alyssa would still roam the streets and do whatever she could to get her hands on more drugs. On April 1st, 2001 at 3 a.m., Inuka was woken up by a phone call from Alyssa. When she answered, Alyssa told her that she met an amazing man and she wanted Inuka to speak to him. Inuka was hesitant, but she agreed to talk to him. The man she was referring to was Maury Travis. She would say to him, quote, "You got my girl over there?" And he said, quote, "You've been really nice to her, but you don't have to worry about her tonight. She's safe." About 9 hours after this call, police would find Alyssa's body in a ditch. She was partially clothed, and it was confirmed that she was strangled to death. Unfortunately, there was no way to track down who murdered her at the moment because Inuka was never given a name in the phone call, and Alyssa had called from her own phone. Could you imagine realizing that you were on the phone with someone as evil as Maury Travis? That would haunt me forever. At the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that Maury targeted sex workers because, like other serial killers, he assumed she didn't have family that would look for her because of her lifestyle. Along with that, a lot of lower-income neighborhoods don't have the best police stations. Most of them are underfunded, so sex worker cases are usually considered lower priority. His next victim is 36-year-old Teresa Wilson. When she was a child, she was often left alone by her parents, which made her act out as she got older. She never did heavy drugs, but her friends would recall that she would smoke marijuana occasionally. She got pregnant when she was 17 and decided to drop out of school in order to take care of her child. According to everyone that knew her, she was a great attentive mom that wanted the best for her child. Unfortunately, however, Teresa began using crack, and in order to pay for her very expensive addiction, she turned to sex work. She also got arrested on multiple occasions for shoplifting, drug possession, and theft. Sadly, her daughter would be waiting on a bench near the area her mom was working. She would wait for her to be done with her client, but later on, at around age 10, she was taken to a children's home. It wasn't out of the ordinary for her to not be around for a couple of days, because she often went MIA. In May of 2001, Maury took her to his home where they smoked crack. He tied her up and kept her in the basement just like he did with the other women. He then verbally and physically abused her, all while filming. So you may be thinking, why exactly did Maury film these murders? Well, lots of murderers like to relive their crimes. Some of them use it for sexual pleasure, while others consider them to be trophies. These items are known as murderous mementos. Unfortunately, Maury strangled her to death, and when her body was found, her body had been too decomposed for identification. However, they found a dental plate in her mouth that said Wilson. If she didn't have this plate, it's likely that she may have never been identified. The police wouldn't get a break, however, because just 8 days after they found Teresa's body, they would find another woman. They found 46-year-old Betty James. She was also a sex worker, and she had been tied up and strangled just like the other women, but she also had a tire mark on her legs. This told police that whoever murdered her ran her over also. Then, on June 29, 2001, just a month after the discovery of Betty James, another woman was found dead. The woman was identified as 36-year-old Verona Thompson. She was also a sex worker, and her cause of death was strangulation. Police realized that they had a serial killer on their hands, so they set up a task force. You would assume that because all of the bodies were found, Maury would lay low or wait to commit another evil crime, but this did not stop him. In fact, on the 4th of July in 2001, his neighbors would call in and say they saw a scared woman screaming and running from his house. Police arrived on the scene and arrested him for assaulting her. When they questioned him, he said that he met her at a local bar and they went back to his place. She ended up drugging him and trying to take money out of his wallet. He told officers that he quickly grabbed her to get his wallet back, but she proceeded to run out of the house. He was not charged with anything for this incident. Something very eerie to add on to this case is that Maury dated often, including the times he was committing these murders. His next two victims were Yvonne Cruz and Brenda Beasley. They were also sex workers and they were found naked. Their cause of death was also strangulation, but there was one difference with these two victims. The same sperm was found in both of their bodies, confirming that the murderer was responsible for both of these murders. The only problem was that the DNA didn't match any in the CODIS database. CODIS is a national database that holds DNA profiles from convicted felons and evidentiary samples. It is maintained by the FBI. However, Maury's DNA was not in the system because all of his previous crimes took place before the national database was implemented. This left police back where they started. They were worried the murderer would continue to kill more sex workers, but the opposite happened. No more bodies were found, so they began to wonder why. They assumed maybe the person felt that they had enough, maybe they joined the military, or maybe they got arrested for a smaller charge. Maury would return to prison again for a drug charge on November 29, 2001. Now, why his DNA wasn't taken this time is beyond me, but this wouldn't be the end of the case. He was released just a couple of months later in March of the following year. Unfortunately, not too long after he was released, 3 more bodies would be found, but they would be completely unidentifiable. Police weren't able to connect anyone to the new murders, and it's not 100% confirmed that Maury murdered these other 3 women, but lots of people believe he did. Luckily, a reporter named Bill Smith decided to write an article about Teresa Wilson in order to show others the real her. Bill felt for all of the victims and wanted them to get justice, but he had to first get people to see that she wasn't just a sex worker. He talked about how close she was with her daughter and how much she tried to change her life around, and by doing so, he helped get Maury caught. Maury sent the local newspaper a letter that included a map that would lead them to his 17th victim. The letter read, "Dear Bill, nice sob story about Teresa Wilson. Write one about Greenwade. Write a good one, and I'll tell you where many others are to prove I'm real." Here's directions to number 17. Search in a 50-yard radius from the X. Put the story in the Sunday paper like the last. When detectives followed the map, they thought they saw a mushroom in the grass, but it was in fact a bleached human skull. There was also a torso found that had a dress over it. These bodies had been left out for so long that the sun bleached them, and all that was left were the bones. Detectives quickly realized that the map he mailed was from the website Expedia.com. This would link to his computer. The FBI used a subpoena in order to request records of any users that searched around the West Alton area during the time frame the letter was mailed. On June 3rd, Microsoft was able to report to detectives that one computer was responsible for the search. They said that on May 20th, the user zoomed in on the map of the West Alton area around 10 times. This was helpful information, but they didn't have a name yet. This meant the IP address would need to be translated. The FBI went to WorldCom Inc., which allowed local telephone numbers to connect to internet services. WorldCom assigned a temporary IP address in order to figure out who used 65.227.106.78 at the time of the search. Just the next day, the FBI was able to confirm that the user was in fact Maury Travis. Police arrived at Maury's house on June 7th around 7 a.m. He was awoken by police and the FBI. He would open the door in his underwear. He would ask why they were there at such an early hour, and they would say, "You know why we're here." One of the detectives would recall that Maury was very controlling during their conversation. Anytime he would be asked a question, he would repeat the same question back to them. Police would quickly switch their approach and would tell him that they had search warrants for his house and that they knew the map was taken from his computer. As soon as he heard that his computer traced back to him, he got angry and began cursing at it. Detectives then proceeded to check his basement. The top part of his home was well kept and organized, but the basement was a complete mess. They found blood on the floor and began to gather the evidence. They also found wigs, underwear, and a list of instructions that showed how to kidnap women and keep them in his basement. While this was happening, police showed photos of his victims to him. They were happy, smiling photos of the victims. Police decided to ask him if he had ever seen, met, or known any of the women, and he would say he didn't. But just 10 minutes later, he would ask if he could see the photos of those dead girls again. However, the police never mentioned that they were dead. They brought this to his attention and he knew he was caught. He put his head down and stayed quiet for a little bit before telling them, "Come on, I'll take you." They proceeded to ask where he would be taking them, and Maury responded, "You know where. You've been asking, I'll take you." While on the way to the next potential crime scene, Maury told them he couldn't do it and that they needed to take him to jail. He grew angrier and kept saying, "Lock me up." When he was taken back to the station, the only thing he was worried about was how his mom would feel when she found out. He would ask the detectives, "What am I going to tell my mom?" You would think that someone that could commit such horrible crimes wouldn't care about what their mom would think, but he did. His mother has never made a statement publicly about the case. She's also never done an interview. Though he was only linked to 12 murders, he claimed to have killed over 17 women, and police believe he killed even more. The tapes he filmed were recovered, and when they were, the police would ask, "Do you know what we found in your basement?" To which he responded, "I knew you'd find it." These tapes were so horrifying that the police department offered therapy to everyone that had to watch them. Maury was arrested and put in solitary confinement after his DNA was tested, but just 3 days after his capture, he hung himself in his cell. There was an inmate assigned to make sure he didn't commit suicide. This is something a lot of people aren't aware of, but it's quite popular. There are lots of ways that inmates can be given more responsibility, and this is an example of that. It is not known what the inmate was doing or what happened after this, but we do know that Maury got the easy way out. It's interesting to note that Maury had seen a prison psychologist and seemed like he was fine, but once again, serial killers are very good at deception. Maury used a bedsheet to hang himself and a washcloth and tissue in order to gag his mouth and cover his nose. He did also write a suicide note to his mom. It read, "Dear Mom, I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you and the family. My death seems to be the only way out and a fast end to all the publicity. You were the best mother a man can have, but I've been sick for a long time, sick in the head, since I was about 14. I don't know why, I was just sick. I've never felt normal or happy at any time in my life. I think about the life I led and what's ahead of me. This seems the best solution for all involved, especially me, because I won't spend the rest of my life locked up, or worse, let them kill me with a needle. Tell Grandma, Marina, James, and everybody I love them dearly. I love you the most, but you know that. Forever, your son. It's crazy to think about the fact that if that reporter never wrote that article about Maury, he may have never been caught. More women could have been victims, and who knows how long it would have gone on for. This case has absolutely haunted me for quite some time now, and it is so sad that these women were never truly given justice. As always, all evidence will be linked in the show notes. Feel free to follow our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast, or my personal at Annalisa. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next one. As I mentioned earlier, if you have time, please leave a review. It helps out a lot.